Hello and welcome to World Talks. My name is Diana Skaya. Developments in Ukraine are rapidly evolving. Now, President Donald Trump has cut off frozen military aid to Ukraine, dealing a major blow to Kyiv's fight against Russia. And while European allies have stepped in with support, they may not be able to fill the gap left by Washington. Now, to delve into the details, I'm joined by Jan Ruzicka, lecturer in security studies at the Aberystwyth University. Welcome to the program. So good to have you on World Talks here this morning.
Good morning, Diana.
Jan, so I'm looking at a Financial Times first report that was published yesterday on the 4th of March that writes that Ukraine will run out of U.S. weapons by summer, and that along the 1,000-kilometer-long front line, the end of U.S. military aid will have far-reaching consequences for the Ukrainian army, even if European allies supplement some of this missing equipment. What is your comment on this?
Well, I suppose that is to be expected. The U.S. military aid to Ukraine has been significant, and it has obviously made a difference. And when it is stopped, assuming that it's not renewed or resumed, then obviously it will be missing. They would have probably prepared for this. This is not the first time that there might be a significant halt to the U.S. deliveries, but I'm sure there are ways to tackle this, but it will be felt.
After this clash that took place between Zelenskyy and Trump at the Oval Office, Zelenskyy now, he wrote a letter to Trump, and now Zelenskyy has proposed a prisoner exchange and a truce in the sky and sea as the first steps towards ending the war. Now, do you think that Russia would actually agree to these terms? Is this more of a symbolic move? And how do you react to this?
Well, if I knew how Russia will react, it would probably make me a very rich man. But on the serious side, it would seem to me that it's an indication where Ukraine expects greatest difficulties. If you read that statement carefully, prisoners exchange, obviously, that's manpower, but these people would probably not be immediately redeployed. But crucially, if the truce were to be in the air, it would aid Ukraine, where probably the greatest disruption of the U.S. deliveries is to be expected, namely on defense, missile defense, and where Russia has been attacking quite decisively, including civilian infrastructure.
Jan, what would you say are Zelenskyy's best options right now? Should he double down on securing European support? Should he push harder for a peace deal, or possibly take another approach?
Well, I suspect he will want to shore up his support in Europe. And I would imagine, much as he will try to mend fences with the United States has now become somewhat unreliable, if I put it mildly. And the whims of American decision-making have been on display for the last month. It is unpredictable and uncertain, and I'm sure he will need to take this into calculation. He will try to improve relations with the United States, but he must have a plan B. As to a peace deal, well, it of course depends on what the terms of that deal would be. But I think he is largely correct in believing that without security guarantees, there is no reason to assume that Russia would stick to any peace deal, and that it wouldn't turn into a capitulation or to a truce where Russia will regroup and attack again.
Yeah, and you just said that he should have a plan B. What do you suggest? What could plan B look like?
Well, I'm sure they would have been preparing for a possible cut-off in the U.S. supply. So I would imagine they will have some material stashed, which they could deploy. Supplies from Europe might come on. We have seen and we know that Ukraine has been ramping up its own production. It will, of course, also depend on the scale of Ukrainian operations in the field. So obviously, if you're just trying to hold the line, that will require different things than if you are trying to do something bigger. I suspect they will go into a holding pattern and they will try to withstand the blow until either something can be negotiated or supplies resume or European production picks up. But of course, that is still a significant time away.
But again, that's very interesting what you just said, that it's a significant time away. I mean, let's talk about this rearmament for a second. Now, let's go back to Ursula von der Leyen's words for a moment. She said this is a moment for Europe. Now, do you think that the EU is truly ready to step up, fill in this gap left by US, I mean, in global security? I mean, you mentioned their security guarantees. And if you think, I mean, if Europe does step up its defense efforts, what could that look like in practical terms? I mean, are we increasing military production, new alliances, something else? And I mean, you mentioned a very important word here, time. How long? What's a timeline that we could realistically be looking at here?
So if I take it from where you started, I don't think the idea is to replace the United States in terms of global security. That would require capacities that are clearly beyond European reach at the moment and even in the short to medium outlook. But Europe can significantly improve the situation in Europe, including in Ukraine. Ursula von der Leyen basically announced 150 billion euros. That's a lot of money, but of course, in terms of what is required, more will be needed. I think she gave the figure of 800 or possibly freeing up to 800 billion, though I think the 800 billion remains a bit of a hypothetical figure. But certainly it could make a difference. It will, if there is money, it will find places to go into, and so production will ramp up. This is not the immediate shock. The war has been around and things have been taking place. Slowly, perhaps, but production has been picking up in Europe. And so I think it could make a difference. Whether that is going to be fast enough for Ukraine, we shall see. It depends on what kind of pressure Ukraine is facing from Russia. It depends what kind of pressure Ukraine is facing from the United States, because let's face it, the United States has really been just pressuring the Ukrainian side and not the Russians. So
why?
Yeah,
let me ask you this. I mean, why? It's, very part point. Why has Trump's administration been putting so much pressure on Ukraine and if almost none on Russia?
I mean, we can only speculate here, right? But President Trump was campaigning on the peace in Ukraine. He made what I can say and what I think everyone can see as quite unrealistic statements that he can finish the war in one day. That was never going to happen. It may have been a rhetorical figure, but of course, rhetorical figures do live on. And he now feels maybe he needs to deliver on his promise. And the easiest way how to deliver on that promise from his point of view is, of course, pressure the Ukrainians, because the Russians really don't take anything that he says that seriously. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't seem to want to put pressure on them. I don't know why. But I would imagine that this is the path of least resistance that he's taking. And Ukraine is paying the price.
Jana, just a short while ago, I mean, you said that the European Commission is proposing that 150 billion euro in joint borrowing for defense as part of a larger 800 billion euro effort. But now, would you say that, I mean, pooling resources for air defense, artillery, for instance, cyber capabilities, all right, it could strengthen Europe's defenses, but will these EU countries, jointly together actually commit to this level of spending?
It will depend on individual countries. I'm certain that there are some that will not. If you take Hungary, I suspect, we have seen Hungarian behavior. And there might be other countries. Belgium hasn't been spending the 2% agreed within NATO, and so on and so forth. But then there are countries, I would say, that will certainly make use of this, and they might make use of it within specific groupings. We've seen Poland, we've seen the Baltic states, we've seen Germany, France, and the Nordic countries. These are countries that will, I'm sure, make use of this. 150 billion is a large sum, but of course much more will be needed. But I'm sure countries will make use of this. Whether this can be agreed at the meeting on Thursday, tomorrow, and what exactly it looks like, I'm sure is to be negotiated. The statement from Ursula von der Leyen was relatively brief. It lacked in specific, but I'm sure there is a lot to be done with this by countries that want to do so.
Yeah, and so there's been talks about a European nuclear deterrent. Now, do you think that the EU should develop its own independent nuclear strategy, or is NATO still the best path?
So I think a nuclear deterrent in the arms of the EU is I don't think that's realistic at the moment. And I don't think people even talk about it in that way. Where we could see something like a European nuclear deterrent would, of course, be based on the French nuclear force and possibly something to do with the UK. But of course, that is more complicated by the United Kingdom having left the Union. But as to someone sitting in Brussels and having a control over independent nuclear deterrent, that we're not talking in any realistic timescale.
Thank you so much, Jan Ruzicka, lecturer in security studies at the Aberystwyth University. Thank you so much for all your insight and input here this morning on TVP World.
You're very welcome. Nice to speak to you. Bye-bye.
And that completes this edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm Diana Skaya. Thanks for watching, and do stay tuned for more news and features.